I wish you bluebirds in the spring to hear your song, a song to sing, and then a kiss. More than this, I wish you love.
Welcome to the Forgiveness Solution Podcast. I'm Rev Misty. I'm so glad you're here with us today. I would love to hear from you. So please find me at revmisty.com, and I would love it if you could send me your forgiveness questions at revmisty@outlook.com. And please send me your forgiveness stories. I would love to hear them. Well, today we are going to have an amazing guest, and I'm so excited to share this story with you. Today, Erik Erwin is going to talk with us. And Erik is a community relations director for senior living, and specifically in Alzheimer's and dementia. And this is a really personal story for me. My mother had dementia, and she passed, it's been just a year or so now. And I will tell you, it's such a personal story to watch somebody slowly leave due to dementia or Alzheimer's. But as we get deeply into this, we're going to go further into Erik's bio here. But Erik, can you say hi?
Hello. How are you today?
We're great. It's a beautiful sunny day here in San Diego, so it's hard not to be wonderful here in San Diego. But for everybody, wherever you are, I hope the weather is as beautiful. So Erik has been working in senior living and specifically Alzheimer's and dementia for about 13 years, and he comes from a really rich background before that as a youth minister, even some really interesting sports background in baseball. But so he has a real strong faith background, and in working in Alzheimer's and dementia, he came to that really personally with his grandfather, and he's going to probably get more into that as we go forward. But I have some really interesting stats on Alzheimer's dementia, and believe it or not, I didn't even really know these until I literally got plucked and put into it myself. And I talk about lots of times about things that happen to you, like getting your ticket punched. Mm-hmm. Like here you are on a ride, and not a ride you chose to be on, by the way. And that when I got punched and got put on a ride of dementia with my mom, I did not know the amount of people that get diagnosed per year. So according to the Alzheimer's and Dementia Association, about 500,000 people under the age of 65 currently are suffering, and that's under the age of 65. And in 2016, 5.4 million people currently are suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia. And nearly half of the people over 85 right now, over the 85 have Alzheimer's and dementia. Yeah. And we all know that we live longer, correct? I mean, really. I mean, that's a good thing. Yeah. I mean, if you look back at the stats, in 1900, we didn't live very long. No. I mean, 50 was old.
Yeah. And that's the reason why we get Social Security at 65. Because they didn't think anyone would make it there.
Right. so it's all great that we live longer and that we're healthier longer, but we have more Alzheimer's and dementia because of that. And the early onset can be as early as 30. Yeah. So, and it's really a sad, and that's usually a genetic type, correct?
Typically, yeah. Usually in the younger, I believe, and I don't want to get these mixed up, but I think there's about 104 different types of dementia.
Really?
Alzheimer's being the most common of those. So dementia is a big umbrella,
right?
And there's a bunch of different types. It can affect your occipital lobe, the frontal lobe, the different parts of your brain. But generally, if the younger, 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that's usually the genetic form.
Right.
Typically, not always, but yeah. So that's when we see people like that, it generally affects the frontal lobe at that point, kind of your filter.
Right. And many years ago, I actually used to work in that field, and I had no idea that it would touch my life, and it sure did. And then the stress that it causes the caregiver or family member, you don't really understand that stress until you're in it. Yeah. To watch your loved one lose daily memories of their life, and ultimately even lose the ability to care for themselves, forget everything, how to even eat.
Yep.
It is heartbreaking. It is really heartbreaking. And then especially if you have a difficult relationship with them or you've had issues with them throughout your life, and then all of a sudden it's not something you can solve because they can't really have that conversation with you anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not only do you now have what I call situational unforgiveness, which when bad things happen, you pick up anger or those ugly emotions, a smoldering resentment to what's happening to you in your life. But then even if you have an unforgiveness issue with the person, you now can't necessarily resolve it because they no longer even remember the issue. So, which sometimes is a blessing. I know it was in my situation, but it's such as a caregiver, a stressful time.
Yep.
And Erik is here to talk about many different aspects of that because Erik is the person that you meet when it is time, when the family member it can no longer live on their own, or they should not be living maybe even with you or your family, and they really need more care.
Yeah.
And I know that Erik is one of the first people I talked to when I knew that it was time for my mother to go meet and go to a facility, quote unquote a facility. Now, Erik, when people hear the word facility, we all think we will never ever want our family member, our loved one go to a nursing home, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And that is such a heartbreaking. The idea of it is so hard. So can you explain the difference between a nursing home, a skilled facility, and then an assisted facility?
Exactly. So most people, when they think about senior living and those types of things, they think about white walls, white floors, people drooling, and that's typically the first thing that you think of because for generations, that's been the only place for seniors. But more recently, in the last 10, 15 years, 20 years-ish, they start having assisted living. And so kind of the difference is skilled nursing is kind of just a rehab stint. You're there 30 to 90 days. You might have a hip replacement or a knee replacement. And they're there to give you physical therapy that's covered by insurance. Typically it's covered by Medicare. But they're only going to pay 90 to, roughly 120 days. And then it's private pay after that. And so that's what skilled nursing is, rehab care. Nursing homes are more of a long-term, which they can be associated with the skilled nursing, and that's for people who generally maybe have a tracheotomy, or they'll have a PICC line, or something that can't be taken care of. Maybe they're dead weight, they need a Hoyer lift. So a lot of those are nursing home.
So more of a real deep medical issue.
Medical issue, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And so, but assisted living has kind of propped up because we're finding more and more people that have memory loss. They really just need a starter button. So they love this activity, but they just can't get there on their own. So that's where we come into play, and we help them get to those activities. And if we're doing our job, the company that I work for actually, a lot of our programming was developed by UCSD and Johns Hopkins University, so it's more of a therapeutic memory enrichment program. So it's kind of there to help with the acts of daily living. They might need help with bathing or dressing or grooming, those types of things. Maybe just standby assistance showering. They might need food, or they might need housekeeping. So that's kind of where assisted living comes in. It's kind of all the stuff that we don't like to do at our own house.
Right.
And so we kind of take care of those things so that families can then in turn have better quality time together. So instead of being at home having to take care of the landscaper and the garbage disposal that just broke and the washing machine and being a manager of a household for their loved one, we become that for them. So then they can in turn have quality time with their loved one.
Plus, I would also like to add that not only that is that you're very skilled in dealing with the dementia, Alzheimer's. You guys know the specifics of the disease state.
Correct.
Because as a family member, your heart is in the right place many times, but you don't understand the disease state. Even if you've read everything and understand it, but when someone is having what they call sundowners, which sundowners is when somebody who has Alzheimer's or dementia gets later in the day, their symptoms get worse.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. Sometimes they get agitated or they understand less, and I joke that everybody gets a little sundowner, so we all get a little grumpy in the evening,
Yeah.
and
That's
but
when I need my Starbucks. So.
yeah, that's when you need your Starbucks. I totally agree with that. 3 p.m. Believe me, I need my cup of coffee. But it gets really difficult, and sometimes the person can get a little more agitated, and it's much more difficult to handle. And with all the activities of real life, whether you have children at home or you're just dealing with stuff, it's very difficult to provide the quality of care that they might need. And that's really sometimes when the real identifying of needing assisted living. On top of that, it might be also time when maybe the person starts to wander.
Correct.
And I know that my mom had actually gotten to a place where we weren't quite sure she should be cooking on her own anymore, that we couldn't really trust her to know where she was out in the world anymore, though she didn't identify that way.
Yeah.
She couldn't understand that on her own.
Mm-hmm.
And she got very grumpy and very upset. And she was a little bit scared.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys were so great at calming her down. And we actually learned, as a family, we learned from you guys at that. So again, I would also add that you guys do so much more, and I can't even tell you all the things. So if anybody out there is listening and has a family member who is suffering from the early onset stages of dementia and Alzheimer's, my heart goes out to you, first of all. It's a heartbreaking diagnosis, but know that there are people who are very skilled that can help you with this, because I'm going to tell you, with the stats they are coming out, that I'm telling you that every 66 seconds, somebody is diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, and that is going up. In 2050, they say that's going to go up to every 33 seconds.
Yeah.
Face it, we're living longer. So,
and just practically, I mean, we do have a secured area for memory loss, and I just know this area in general because I'm always in it, I'm always around it. All of our secured areas for dementia care are pretty much full. And we're at capacity there. They keep building more, but obviously we can tell that, I always tell people, I joke around, but it's very serious. I hope that one day I'm out of a job for dementia care and Alzheimer's care. I hope that we find a cure soon so that I can go find something else to do.
that would be really, really lovely.
And so, but it is, we're full, and everyone's dealing with this. Everyone knows someone who has someone with memory loss. It's either their mom, their dad, their uncle. I'm dealing with it right now with my grandmother-in-law. In fact, my wife just came back from visiting her in North Dakota, and it's just a very emotional time, very tough time.
It is a very tough time, and that's kind of what I want to get into, the emotional piece, and that was a perfect way to transition to the emotional piece. And this is what you deal with.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah.
And with your background in as a youth minister, faith has been really strong in your life.
Correct, yeah.
And you dealt with this with your own grandfather, and you've seen what unforgiveness does in other people's life. And last time I checked, you're human, right?
Yeah,
You're human? You're human?
I
I'm
hope
so
so.
glad. I'm so glad. So
Maybe.
I'm sure you've dealt with your own unforgiveness issues, right? And having such a strong faith. Tell me how that plays when you're dealing with families and you can see how they might be struggling with forgiveness, both about the situation that they're in and maybe even with the person that they're having to deal with. That's difficult.
So it's always difficult because most of the families I deal with or I work with that come and ask me for help, guess what? We all have issues. I don't know if you know that, but we're
no, really,
100% of us. And it's so funny because these families come in and they'll have mom has dementia, and then they have 4 siblings, and then they have spouses. And so there's all these different vying personalities and backgrounds and things that are all coming together to help care for one person. And so just like anything in our life, I guarantee you get 2 people in a room and you ask them, how are we going to care for this person? They're going to disagree. And so now we're trying to get 4 kids plus their spouses and those. So what I normally see is the person who's giving the primary care. They're the ones that are worn out, they're tired, and their brothers and sisters don't see everything that they're going through. So there's always the resentment there, with the brother or the sister. And then typically they'll have a spouse. So the spouse is saying, gosh, I feel a little neglected too because, you're giving all your time and care to your parent. And so there's all these different vying personalities and things that are vying for this one primary caregiver's time. And he or she I typically deal with daughters. And not that the sons aren't great, but typically it's the daughters or the daughter-in-laws that I'm working with because they're typically more nurturing. They're not always, but I would say there are outliers.
There are outliers.
But it's generally the ladies. And so, when we get down to the nitty-gritty of it all, is this one primary caregiver is trying to please everyone. And they feel inadequate because they're having to ask for help. And then the brothers and sisters are saying, gosh, why can't mom stay home with you? Why can't she be in there? And they don't realize that it's a full-time job just being a caregiver. It's an 80, 120-hour job a week. And so that's why you're seeing all these assisted living communities starting to pop up, because generally, yes, kids used to take care of their parents. But the deal is that they were 35 years old and their parents were 65 years old. So they still had their faculties. They still were physically fine. But now what we're seeing is 65, 70-year-olds taking care of 95, 100-year-olds. And it's a different kind of lifestyle. You don't have the energy at 65 and 70 that you typically did at 35. I mean, my dad's 70. If I needed to take care of him, I could do it. No big deal. I've got 3 kids. We can do this. However, you put that into someone who's 65, 70, it's a little bit more to manage. And so that's why you're kind of seeing this change in the industry. It's just because people are generally living longer. So
I agree. Wow, that was a perfect way to say that. I think he was seeing my family right there.
And that's 100% of the families I work with. So, we are all very empathetic to that because, I'm there, I've been there, I'm going there. And going through it right now with you, so.
I would agree that most families, they want to all do the best. They all come from different opinions, different sources, and money sources also. I think that the younger generation that's current, when I say younger, I would say under 60, currently get that retirement needs to be paid for differently. But the older generation still had the version that Social Security was supposed to take care of them. And I know that my mother, she died at 86, but her generation still had a little bit that they were taking care of. She didn't save properly. She didn't figure that out. And so financially, her illness and her retirement fell on the children. And we talked about the different types of care, but we didn't really speak about who pays for those types of care. And another set of stress for those care providers is the financial piece. And another part of anger and those ugly emotions that come up is that. And resentment comes up both towards our governmental system, towards each other in a family, and this is really where those ugly emotions come up with each other, and it's who's going to pay for it. Okay, so nursing homes and skilled care can be paid for when it's medically necessary, but it's usually a medical need. For wound care and diabetes and heart issues are paid for usually under insurance or Medicaid, but for a short period of time, correct?
Yeah. And if someone does run out of funds, in California it's called Medi-Cal, but around the world it's Medicaid. Around the United States, it's called Medicaid. So that's for people who've exhausted their resources and they still need to be cared for. And so those are typically in a skilled nursing facility that they're going to be doing those, or a nursing home. That they're going to have those, and they'll be approved by the state, a Medi-Cal facility or a Medicaid facility, and that's where they'll get that long-term care.
And that's that typical nursing home that we hear about, or a rehab facility type.
Yeah, they all kind of have this rehab, skilled nursing home. Those are all kind of the same entity.
Okay, and those are usually a short-term fix for rehabbing from a surgery or a medical condition, correct? But that doesn't fall into the long-term piece of dementia, Alzheimer's, because how long does usually somebody suffer from something like dementia, Alzheimer's?
Yeah, I mean, typically, most people, like the statistics said, 50% of anyone over the age of 85 will have some form of dementia. Typically what we see is once they start getting into that mode where they start needing us, where the family starts recognizing that they need us, and need our help and what we can provide, typically what I say between 3 and 5 years. So I'm usually looking for resources between 3 and 5 years. Can they go 10 years? Of course they can. But generally speaking, once that dementia starts kicking in, they probably had it for a while anyway. But by the time the family starts saying, gosh, like I remember you saying, we don't want mom to leave the stove on.
Yes, that's exactly.
She'll cook, but she forgets to turn it off.
Right.
Which is and now we're in a danger system. We're in Dangerville. And so that's where families start saying, gosh, it's time. And I guess, and your mom was with us for about what, almost
2 years, a little over 2 years. But I would definitely say her diagnosis came a little late. My mom was able to hide it for quite a little while, but I would say 4 years fully diagnosed, but she probably had symptoms for 5 years. So you're right on target. She hit the statistic.
And too, just like your mom and a lot of the people that live in our buildings, they're architects, they're engineers, they're doctors, they're attorneys, they built this nation. I mean, basically they are the greatest generation, and they are the greatest for a reason, but they're very learned. And even the blue collar type of workers, especially in Southern California, we have a lot of people that worked in this aerospace engineering. So they might not have been an engineer, but they're the ones who are actually building the tools to do that. So they have a lot of gray matter. They're very smart people. They're very learned people. They've been to school. They've been to college. They fought in wars. They've been around the world. So they know a lot of things. And so they can kind of disguise the effects of dementia for a long time, just because they have that gray matter. But what happens is, and just like in your mom's case, that plaque and tangle took over that one part of the brain that was hiding everything. And when it did, it was like, whoa, what happened to mom?
That's exactly
overnight. And, that's kind of what happened is, with a lot of people, they're like, gosh, overnight, mom just, just changed. And I always say, okay, first let's check and see if there's a urinary tract infection.
Yes, that's true.
Let's check for a UTI, because that has symptoms very similar to dementia, and it'll happen overnight. And if that comes back negative, now let's look into the other aspects.
Right, great.
So,
my mom was, and if any of you hear the beginning, and don't fast forward the 15 seconds on your podcast, you'll hear a wonderful voice, and the singing voice is actually my mother. She was an amazing singer, and even in her elderly time, she had an amazing voice. And so the song I Wish You Love at the beginning of the podcast is actually my mom, and at the end of the podcast is my mother. And music is supposed to help you keep your memory longer. So I believe it is also what helped her hide her dementia the longest. So she had an amazing, and she actually remembered lyrics longer than she remembered her own grandchildren. So she was able to really keep that in her brain the longest. But so the stress of the money piece is big. So we talked about the fact that nursing homes and stuff are usually covered by insurance for a short period of time. But assisted living, when we really need that extra help and the wonderful help, is usually not covered by any insurance except for long-term care insurance, which very few people have and plan for. So it's usually all out of pocket. And it can range all over the United States, but usually ranges in the $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, up to $7,000 to $9,000 a month for care. And it depends on the level of care, what part of the nation you're in, but it's a very expensive per month situation. And I don't think many people know that. So if you are listening to this podcast, please, please, please take away that you need to have this discussion with your parents and look at your own finances and plan ahead. Because if we personally fall into those statistics, you don't want to put this burden on your children. So that's my own soapbox right there. Take it from a family member that had to do that for my mom. And that does also cause stress, and money is usually the number one argument between husband, wife, or family members. And it can cause a lot of stress, and I'm sure you see that. Oh,
all the time. And, that's usually the piece that comes in, because when I have 4 or 5 children and, they're all, well, how are we going to pay for this? Mom and dad had a certain amount of money. and this and that. And so they're, some of the kids over here are saying, gosh, I would like to have an inheritance because I kind of need it. And then you have the kids over here saying, this is mom and dad's money. They built it. They earned it. We're going to use it for that. And so you kind of see those two pieces. And then we also see, situations of when it comes to forgiveness and dysfunction. I see a lot of families that put the fun in dysfunction. And,
put the fun in dysfunction.
But they'll have a son or a daughter that are living in the house, and they're 50, 60 years old. They've never had a job. Mom and dad have always taken care of them, and they just have kind of gone through, the motions of life, and now mom and dad need care, and now they need to sell that house to be able to pay for care, because most of the people that we work with, they'll have a little bit of retirement, they'll have maybe a little pension, they'll have 401k, but generally their house is the asset that's going to pay for this. And in Southern California, our houses are in the $400,000 or $500,000 range, so we have a pretty good nest egg that we can pay for a lot of this. But then you have that kid that lives in the house, and he or she needs that house. I saw a family that went through this, and one of the daughters was on drugs, and literally they had to take the sheriff in there and remove her and her boyfriend from the house, and talk about the bitterness from all the brothers and sisters.
Heartbreaking.
I mean, every time they come in, I can't believe my sister, and from a faith perspective, I always think about addictions. I have a saying that everyone has an addiction. It might be shopping.
Coffee.
It might be, I'm a Starbucks addict. But that's where you kind of see that. And so there was a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort in that family particular because of the addiction that was over here, because mom and dad need this. And how are we going to pay for this if you're in the house? How are we going to pay for this if we're also paying for you to live here and do all these things? So it was a lot of different things going around in that family. And I even saw that after both the husband and wife, dear family, and after they passed away, just the fighting increased. It was even, the mom and dad, our residents, were the ones that kind of held the glue together. And one of the husband had dementia. The wife was sharp as a tack, but had some physical needs. And but they held it together, and then all of a sudden that bitterness that had been there for so long within that family was just like a nuclear bomb. And so the fighting and they'd come in and they need statements from us, and they need this from us because now they're going to court to fight over the money. And so, and you have the kids who were the great kids who took care of mom and dad and, all of this. And then you have the childs that have the addictions, and they need that money for their addiction. And so just a lot of, so you can see the fun stuff that we work with daily. But, we always come from a perspective of compassion. We live in a broken world that has a lot of broken people. And so what I always come through is saying, first I need forgiveness because I'm broken. And second, I need to impart that forgiveness to others. And I need to teach them how to do that. And
Very good. Yeah.
And I think, we talked a lot about that.
Yes, we did.
When you first came, and working on that together.
Yeah.
As we went through that, and we saw some great breakthroughs.
Yes, we did.
I love being that little 1% that's in that equation. But when you come back and give me a success story of forgiveness and all of that, just of course, it warms my heart. Yeah. Brings a little tear to my eyes.
I know, me too. Yeah. What an amazing story of unforgiveness, and what unforgiveness can do. So lots of times I get this question about how to forgive. I get it daily, actually, in my work. And I know that I face that question in my own life, and that's what led me to my work. And with my own family, with my own everyday life. And, most people go through life thinking, I'm a good person. I'm an okay person. I try really hard every day to be that good person. Whether you're that person helping out the family and trying to do the, quote, right thing. Yeah. If you're still holding that unforgiveness, that anger, that peace, it's really about expectations, right? Yeah. I expected that brother, that sister, that parent to be a different person, and they chose not to be. And I'm holding unforgiveness because of that. This was my expectation. They did not meet it. Because of that, I'm very angry, sad, mad, all those things. Yeah. All of a sudden, we need to change our expectation, don't we? We need to change our expectation because they were either unwilling or they did not have the skill to live up to your expectation.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you look at it a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
You reframe it. And when you realize that some people aren't able to live up to your expectation because of their unfortunate abilities,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then all of a sudden you're like, oh no, I can let them off the hook. Because last time I checked, I wasn't able to live up to everybody's expectation. And
Yeah.
I sure hope that people let me off the hook sometime.
Yeah.
So I know that worked in my life. I had, and Erik here knew one of my siblings. I've talked about him a lot. My twin brother, he knew him. And I had to let him off the hook. I wanted him to be a different brother.
Yeah.
And in my life, I wanted my mother to be a different mother. And in her disease state, I always joke that if you want to, if you're mad, you have to remember why you're mad to be mad, right? Well, dementia gave my mother a strange gift. She no longer remembered why she was mad at everybody and everything in her life.
Yeah.
So she was free of that. So we got to see this beautiful person underneath that. For a short period of time before she lost other abilities. But so that gave me a beautiful piece of time with her. So I'm very blessed that God gave me that. And I'm sure that was one of the happy stories for you.
Yeah, it was. And you do see that in my industry. I mean, just, going through it, we see the happy stories, we see the happy endings as well, and
right.
The happily ever afters, but it's because of forgiveness.
Right.
And, it's so funny that you were talking about this, because I was digging into the Bible the other day, and Jesus was saying, listen, the world tells you, love those who love you, but I'm going to give you a new commandment. Love your enemies.
Yes.
And I'm like, whoa.
That's hard.
That's really hard, especially when your enemy is in your family.
Yes.
Right? Or
exactly.
different things, or those
or the person you once loved, and you're trying to say, but they did me wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think too, and I was telling you before, we say forgiveness, but forgiveness doesn't mean restoration.
Right.
Forgiveness just means that. Forgiveness.
It doesn't mean trust.
It doesn't mean trust,
Right.
and you got to do it continually. I told you that story. I remember my pastor back about 10 years ago. He told a story of a tree, and his neighbor. Just a quick story. His neighbor had a tree that went right next to his fence, and it kept bowing the fence, and kept breaking. So he'd go to his neighbor, and the neighbor says, "No, I'm not going to cut down my tree." He says, "Listen, I'll pay for it. I'll take whatever you want me to do, but it's bowing my fence. Even if I build a new fence, it's going to be on my property." So, long story short, it was big, big mess. Finally, the neighbor says, "Okay, I'll let you cut down the tree." So he pays for it. They cut down the tree, and he puts a new fence up. But what happens about 6-7 months later? The roots from that tree come back up, and every time they would come up, it would remind him of that anger he had towards his neighbor. So he'd go and he'd get his weed whacker out, and he would just whack those roots away, right? But what happened about 6 months later? Those roots would come back up, and it remind him of how angry he was with his neighbor. And why am I hacking these roots again? And it was just a great story that he told the congregation. He says, even, it was a very practical lesson that just because you forgive doesn't mean you forget.
Right.
But when you forgive, a lot of times those roots come back up underneath the gate again, or underneath the fence, and you have to weed whack them.
Right.
And just take out your weed whacker and whack them away, and then, they might come up in 6 months. You might wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning and just being ticked off. But forgiveness isn't restoration. Forgiveness is just that. It's for you. It's not for them. And it's just to let go of that.
It happens in your heart, mind, and soul.
Yep.
And when that happens, it lets empathy sneak in, like surprisingly. And you're like, oh no, empathy just snuck in. And it's a beautiful gift. And I want to thank you for the gift of being here today. Because one, I hope we enlightened a few people on a very unfortunate disease state.
Yeah.
So again, if any of you out there are dealing with this disease state, my heart goes out to you. And if you have to deal with it in the future, please send me an email. I would be happy to exchange any information that I know from living through it. And then also, please understand that forgiveness truly is the link between love and healing. And it lets gratefulness in. It lets you understand so much more. And it lets empathy in. Yep. And so from the Forgiveness Solution, thank you, Erik, so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and all those years of helping so many families through such a tough time, and from a very personal, from deep in my heart, thank you for being there all those years for my mom and for me.
Well, we miss her very much, and I keep a picture of her with me all the time, and we have the fortune of having her little schnauzer, Susie Q, who's named after a song,
of course.
I tear up all the time too. So.
Erik adopted my mom's dog because that's something else she lost the ability to do, was take care of her dog. There's a lot of loss in dementia and Alzheimer's, and I like to think of what I gained from it, which was the ability to see my mom as God's child.
Yeah.
So thank you, and you can again find me at revmisty.com. Please subscribe to this podcast at Sacred Stories, and have a blessed day.
I wish you bluebirds in the spring to hear your song, a song to sing, and then a kiss more than this. I wish you love.